What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. So today we are just picking up where we left off in the last video. We got the whole cooling system complete. We modified that rear flange on the back of the head to accept the Toyota temperature sensor for the coolant. So that's all plumbed in, wired in. We are good to go. Now we need to get this thing basically ready for the road. So I want to go for a test drive today. No promises, but I'm hoping if everything goes as planned, we should be able to take this thing outside and bring it for a quick drive. So what we got to do is I got my starter in, so we're gonna swap out the new starter and adapter plate for that. We got to bleed the cooling system. We got to do some work on the brakes. We still got to bleed those, and then I just got to get underneath, make sure everything with the four-wheel drive, all that is nice and tight, because I don't think I tightened some of that stuff up. So I want to go through every bolt underneath, make sure everything is tight. So let's get to work. We'll start swapping that new starter in, and then we'll bleed the cooling system, praying we don't have any leaks, especially on the back of the head. It is such a pain to work back there. Not a whole lot of room, so I'm hoping we don't have any cooling system leaks. So here's the new starter and starter adapter. Huge thank you to Northwest Fabworks, the place I bought this adapter from. Sent this out. I got it in like 3 or 4 days, and I've just been sitting around waiting for the starter, but we got the adapter plate really fast. So you can see down inside where it's shiny aluminum, they just had to machine that just a little bit deeper so it's not hitting on the bendix of this starter. So I already opened this up. I noticed one thing they just did is they added a ground post right here. So that's going to be very nice to bolt my ground to instead of bolting it through. I think I had it through that bolt there. We're going to move it over here and ground this right to the block, because this adapter plate and the main adapter plate, they're anodized, so you're not going to get a very good ground, if any ground at all, through this plate. I want to clear something up real quick. So I made a post on Facebook on the TDI Swap Truck page on Facebook about this starter issue, and had a lot of people saying a lot of negative things about Northwest Fabworks, about this starter issue. At the end of the day, it is their fault. That machined piece isn't machined deep enough, but the starter itself, I think, is a very good starter, and the issue with that adapter plate has been resolved. And another thing that I think attributes to this issue is the grounding issue. So on this starter here, you can see, I just showed you guys, they added a ground post, but I think a lot of people putting this kit together would completely space a ground, because it's not something you really think about. Usually you just bolt your starter on, hook up the positive, and you're good to go. You never really think about how it's going to ground and where it's grounding. So luckily I thought about it, and I added a ground strap straight from the starter to the engine block. But if you guys are doing this, you definitely need a good ground strap from the body of the starter straight to the engine block, just to make sure you get a good ground. Like I said, it's not going to ground through the anodized plate, so you have to put a ground strap on it. So that being said, I think this plate still is the #1 plate to go to for this swap. It's a very good plate, very well designed, and it fits amazing. This little issue is one little issue. It's not that big of a deal, especially because it's all been resolved now. So shouldn't have any more issues with it at all. So one thing we will have to do is get the other starter out and get the bolts that bolt this plate onto the starter. So let's get that one pulled out. We'll get this bolted on, and then we'll throw this starter in. All right, we got the starter in. We are good to go. Everything's hooked up. Let's drop it down and see how she works. We are good to go with the starter, boys. All right, you guys saw we got our new glow plugs in the mail, so we got those installed. Now I want to go in, clear the codes on the computer, on the VCDS, and see if these codes are gone. All right, looks like the glow plug light or code is gone. I'm still waiting for Malone to take care of this exhaust temp sensor. So once we get that new flash in, that should be taken care of. All right, I went through and bled the brakes again. We'll try that out. We got the coolant filled up. So we gotta just fire this thing up, and I wanna bring it outside, get the front end higher, just because you can see the heater core back there is higher than the radiator. So what you wanna do is get this point of the radiator higher than that heater core valve right here, and because that's just gonna trap all the air if that's the highest point. So we want this, the highest point of this cooling system, then we can bleed all the air out. And hopefully our temp gauge works. Hopefully everything inside, I got VCDS hooked up so I can verify all my temperatures and everything with that. One thing I decided to do real quick before we bring it outside is I want to make sure I got power steering fluid in my pump. So I got this thing jacked up. I am going to bleed the power steering. All you got to do is let that cap off and then just go back and forth with the steering wheel until you don't drop any more fluid. And then you should be good. So I want to get that done before we bring this thing outside. All right, we got her up, got the front end up, and looking good so far. I don't see any coolant leaks, so we're just gonna keep adding coolant until it doesn't take any more. You can see it's kind of bubbling through there, so we're just gonna keep adding until it doesn't suck up any more coolant and get all the way up to temperature. Well, guys, have been idling for, I don't know, 15 minutes so far. Found a few issues. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see up in there, but the return line for the turbo is leaking, so I'll have to do something with that. I can't seem to get any heat into the heater core. These lines are still bone cold, and where thermostat should be open right now, we are like 90, yeah, right at about 90 degrees Celsius, about 200 or so Fahrenheit. And another issue, my freaking gauge did the same thing. It just went all the way to max, so not quite sure what's going on there. I'm going to let this thing idle a little longer, see if I can get hot coolant coming through this heater core. And I know there's just an air pocket in there, but it's just taking forever to bleed. All right, guys, what I want to look at real quick, I got this thing turned off. I want to kind of go through this temp gauge. I'm really curious what's going on. So I think what you can do is ground the connector here from the gauge. If you ground that, the temp gauge should move all the way up, and when you pull it off ground, it should move all the way down. I think what's happening is that gauge or that sender is grounded out, or something in the system is grounded out, and that's what is making the gauge go on full hot. So I'm going to set you guys in the truck looking at the temp gauge. I'm going to come out and ground that, and then we'll go from there. All right, guys, I went and found another sensor here. same one. I have the body grounded like it should be and then plugged in. So let's run inside, turn the key on, and see if that gauge does the same thing. No? There we go. Maybe it is just a bad sensor. I think what I'm going to do is swap that one out of the back housing and see what it does. All right, we got the new sensor in. I'm not going to start it. I'm just going to turn the key on. It still should be plenty warm. It's only been 5 minutes since I've had it off, so maybe 10, but it still should, the gauge should rise. It's still pretty warm. Let's see what it does. What in the hell? Straight up again. Guys, I am so lost with this sensor. So I can ground it, I can plug it in and ground the body of the sensor to anywhere, and the gauge doesn't move like it should with no heat on the end. But as soon as I thread it into the housing and plug it in, it goes to full max. So I have no idea what's going on. What I'm going to do next is pull the cluster out and just pull that temp gauge out, make sure the connections on the back of the temp gauge are good, which I assume they are because it worked fine before I took the motor out and did the swap. So I don't know, either way, check one last thing off the list. I'm going to pull that cluster out and go through that. All right, all the connections and everything looks pretty good underneath on the back of that temp gauge, but I guess we'll go throw it back in and see if anything changed. All right, we got the cluster in, let's fire it up and see if anything. No, still all the way max. What is going on with this thing? I have done a bunch more testing. I've ran a wire straight from the cluster to the sensor, didn't change anything. What I have been noticing is if I plug this in here and if the sensor is at room temperature, the gauge will be all the way on cold, and then as soon as I even just barely touch the torch to it, just barely warm it up, not even warm to the touch, that gauge will completely max out. So I just went and I bought a new sender. I'm gonna try that. I really doubt that 2 of my senders are bad, but it was cheap. It was like 20 bucks. So I figured might as well just try it, see if that does anything. If that doesn't do anything, I guess it has to do something with that gauge. Let's go run inside. I just barely touched that torch to it and see. Yep, look at that, completely maxed out. So something is going on with this gauge. I'm gonna pull this back apart and see if I can figure anything out with the gauge. Hey guys, I forgot I even had this other cluster from the parts truck. So I'm gonna pull this gauge out of the cluster, swap it into this one, see if it does work. If it does, I'm gonna kind of compare the two and see if maybe one of these resistors is bad or something is bad in this gauge, see if I can fix it. If not, I should be able to pull this faceplate off because that's black, that one's white. I should be able to swap the face plates and then just use this gauge. So let's see if we can get this thing to work. Well, that's not going to work. You can see the difference between the two gauges. So I'm going to kind of compare the two and see if I can see anything that is different. They should be the same, at least the same resistance and everything for the actual gauge. Like, I really don't know much about these electronics, but I'm going to do my best with a multimeter, do some tests, and see if I see anything out of the ordinary. All right, guys, it is now the next day. I got really frustrated. I could not figure out this temp gauge issue. I went through the temp gauge, I did all the measurements, all the resistors measure fine. I'll show you guys in a second on the board, but you can actually look at the stripes and figure out the value of each resistor and then do that test. they all tested fine. So I took a break, I came back out this morning, and I think I found the issue in like a half hour. Sometimes you just gotta take a step back and breathe for a little bit, get your mind clear, get your mind right, and come back at it. And I think I found the issue. I'll show you guys. So here's the cluster. When you look at the back where the temp gauge bolts on right here, so these 3 screws, there's a ground, an ignition power, and this last leg is from the actual temp sender. So power, you can see, runs through all these bulbs down here. I already verified it had power. I already verified this wire, actually ran a new wire, or sorry, this one here, the one to the sender. I took a new pin right there and ran that directly to the sender that we put on the housing on the back, and so I know that one was good. The last one we had to look at was ground, and I just kind of assumed that the wiring was connected, the ground was connected, but I went inside here, I found that pin, and it is 4th one over from the center on this white one, and I was not getting the ground, so I traced that wire. Let's go to the other side. I traced that wire all the way down to all these connectors right here, and I found this wire right here is that connected to that wire. So you can see, we'll do this, bam, we got continuity. So I'm pretty sure that's the issue. I'm gonna ground this wire right up. I have another ground right there for my CAN 2 dash, which I'm still waiting to get back, but I'm gonna ground that wire, and as far as I know, we should have a working gauge. All right, you can see we got the new wire right here. We got that grounded up, so we should be good to go. Real quick, I want to show you guys about those resistors and how to find out the value of them and how to test them. So this is the gauge here, you can see, and this is a little circuit board for it. And you flip it over, on the back you can see 1, 2, 3 resistors, and that little one I wasn't able to test because I cannot see what stripes are on there, but these 2 other ones, you can see there's different colored stripes. So what you can do is get these stripe colors, and I found this little calculator. It's called resistor color code calc.com. So you'll take these colors. So we'll do this big green resistor first. What you got to do is just, like I said, get the colors, and they're kind of actually hard to decipher. So this one, it looks like a purple, green, black, gold. So come on the calculator, go purple, green, black, gold. And the last one is just a tolerance, so that's not a huge deal. The first 3 is what you really want to look at. So we got 75 ohms with a 5% tolerance. So you'll get your multimeter and set it to the ohm scale. It is that little horseshoe looking deal. And you'll just go on either side of the resistor, and you should be able to get a reading off it. This one, you can see you can't really get to there, so you have to flip the board over, hit that little solder joint right there, and then you can get your reading. So I'm gonna see if I can do this with one hand. I just got this little jumper wire here. I'm gonna clip that onto there, flip it over, if I can get it to stay. And which solder joint? This one here. Then we'll come look at the scale, and you can see 72, 71, 72. Oh, there we go, got a better connection there. 74, 73. So we are right in that 75 with a 5% tolerance, and you'll just go through and do the other one. This other one, I forget what it was. I had to do it a few times because it's kind of hard to actually get the right colors of these smaller resistors. And like I said, I couldn't even figure that smaller one out right here. So either way, I'm pretty sure the board is good. I'm pretty sure the gauge is good. I'm pretty sure that ground is going to fix it. So let's put this back together, throw everything back in and see what we got. Alright guys, the moment of truth. What we got is this other sensor. Got it grounded twice just to make sure I got a good ground. Got her plugged in. So I'm gonna hit it with my torch. We're gonna go inside and see if that gauge moves at all. So far so good. Let's get out here and put some heat on it. All right, we got her warmed up a little bit. Let's see if it did anything. Oh boys, look at that. It is working. We did it, that freaking ground. That is freaking sweet. That makes me so happy. So if you guys are doing this, this isn't like the older trucks. That is a separate ground. I think on that truck, I never messed with it. So that ground must have been somewhere in the harness, somewhere in the dash it was grounded. This one, no, it was not. It was on a different plug. So make sure you ground that wire. I showed you guys on the back. It is the wire. You just trace that wire from the gauge where it says ground. Trace it all the way out to that big white connector right down there if you guys are doing a Tacoma swap. All right, one thing I want to do real quick is I want to give this lens a buff. You can see, hopefully you can see that on the camera. It's pretty scratched up. So I just got this little Harbor Freight pneumatic polisher and just some regular buffing compound. I'm gonna see what we can do to get this thing shined up and clear, crystal clear. All right, we got that buffed out. A couple minutes later, looking brand new. You can actually see through the thing. It's not all full of scratches. So we are good with the cluster. One other thing I gotta do is fix that oil leak. So I don't know what's going on. It looks like the oil is coming out of just the side of the hose, like there's a hole in it, which is very strange. It is a stainless braided line. So I'm gonna rip that off, figure out what's going on. I may just kind of do a temporary fix for now, and then what I've actually been thinking about is buying the weld-on AN fittings and just building my own AN line and just welding them to each side of that. I think that'll be the most bulletproof way to do this, but we'll tear that line off and figure out what is leaking. Well, I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see inside this hose, but I think I found the problem. It looks like there's a little hole, and it looks like some of that nylon or whatever that inside is like folded on itself somehow. So this line is obviously junk. All right, this is what we got. I got a Gates hose here. I think this is a transmission line, 1/2 inch. It does fit pretty good. It's just a little bit loose. I'm hoping it won't leak. I had to run this smaller clamp on the top because it's pretty tight up on the turbo. And then I just got that bigger one on the bottom to hopefully seal it up. But either way, what I was going to do, like I said, I was going to order up some AN weld-on fittings, but I kind of did some measuring. So this is the complete length of the line. And if I weld those fittings on, one on each side, that's about 1 inch. 2 of these straight fittings, these are about 2 1/4 inches. So times that by 2, that is 4 1/2, plus 1 inch on each side is 5 1/2, 6 1/2. This line is like 8 1/2. So I'm going to have 2 inches of braided line. that is not nearly enough to even, you know, bend where it's supposed to bend. So I don't think that's going to work. I am really hoping this stuff right here is going to work. If not, I'm going to get more of this line and make sure I don't pinch it like that. And I think this line would work. It does fit a little bit better than this rubber line, but like I said, I don't have any, and no stores around me carry this stuff. So we're going to try to make this Gates hose work. All right guys, we're in the truck letting her idle. We're about 50 degrees Celsius, so getting warmed up. This time I actually already have warm heat coming out of the vents, and you can see the temp gauge is starting to rise. So I'm gonna get it up to about 90 degrees Celsius. That's about running temperature, and then we'll see where this is at. And hopefully the cooling system will be bled by then. It already feels a lot better. Last time I wasn't getting any heat at all through the heater, so I think we're getting somewhere. All right guys, we're about 70 degrees Celsius. The temp gauge is still just a little bit below your normal average, be right in the middle, so we're a little below that. So I think we're gonna be pretty accurate. I'm not seeing any more air bubbles coming out, so I think I'm gonna cap this thing off and get it all the way up to temperature, make sure everything is good, make sure we got no leaks, and then we can go drive it. All right guys, got the hood and the bumper on. I'm actually honestly surprised how well this intercooler fits. It barely touches the bumper right there. Everything else clears fine, and I'm actually able to fit the stock grill as well. So pretty crazy, but let's take this thing out. I'm gonna go just putt around the field for a little bit, get it all the way up to temperature, make sure we have no more leaks, and then we can take it out on the road, see what she'll do. She's running, guys. Coolant temps are looking good. They haven't really rise too much, right? Like 83 Celsius, so just about the operating temp. But I will say this thing runs so smooth, drives so smooth. Power so far seems pretty decent. It still is on just the first map, so I definitely think we need to add more fuel to it. There's no smoke. This thing runs so clean right now. So probably could add a little bit of fuel, but running very good so far. I'll do a quick pull here in a sec. Not too bad. Turbo light's a little late, which I'm not quite sure what's going on. All right, guys, first test drive complete. We made it back, no leaks, running really good. There's a few things we need to work on. One, it doesn't build much boost till about 3 grand, which is way too late. And it builds about 20 pounds, which should be building about 30. So I don't know, it could be something to do with the tuning. I gotta talk to Malone, see if we can get another map sent over, see if there's any revisions we need to make with that. If not, we got to figure out why it is so slow to build boost. But either way, running really good, coolant temps are staying good, and drives so smooth, so much smoother than the ALH. I will say there is very little vibrations in any gear, and just very comfortable to drive. So that makes me so excited for this thing. Well guys, I'm gonna wrap this video up. It's getting a little long. I am still waiting for the new map from Malone. Hopefully they can figure out those boost issues. If not, if it is something mechanical, we'll have to dig into it and figure that out. I do have a feeling it is something with the tune. So hopefully we'll get that tune in soon enough. We'll load it on the next video. Got a lot more driving to do. I want to get this thing out, make sure we get all the bugs worked out of it. We do have to finish a few things on the engine as well. We got to hook up the AC and a few other things to do. We got to pull the whole harness out and loom all the harness, make sure all that is good to go. Get the harness back in and just tidy it all up and make it look good. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Go smash that thumbs up button, comment, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.